They stripped my title. In a closed-door meeting, without a word. No warning, no reason, no explanation. I walked out, pretending not to care. But what they didn't know was that I already had the paperwork. I smiled at Darren, the man they told me to report to. He thought he'd won, but autumn was coming, and by the end of Q3, I'd owned the boardroom. They demoted me in silence, so I took everything back quietly. My name is Elena Park, and on the morning they took everything from me, the sun still rose like nothing had happened. It started with a calendar invite, quick sync 15 minutes boardroom 3B, no subject, no details, just a cold digital tap on the shoulder. I wore my usual navy blazer, hair tied tight. I had a good week. Numbers were up. We'd just landed a campaign that brought in $3.2 million in projected revenue. I thought I was walking into a celebration. Instead, I walked into silence. No HR rep, no welcome. Just 3 people, Mark, our CFO, Julie, the co-founder, and Darren. Darren, the intern I used to mentor. The one who asked me how to write a budget report just last quarter. He sat across the table from me, smiling like he already knew the ending. Julie cleared her throat. We've been thinking about restructuring. I nodded slowly, waiting. Mark chimed in, not looking me in the eyes. You've done amazing work, Elena. Truly. But we've decided to bring in some fresh leadership. Fresh. They meant Darren. They wanted me to report to Darren, the boy who once called Photoshop overwhelming. I blinked, trying not to laugh or scream. Julie folded her hands. We're hoping you'll support him in his new role. We value your experience. Experience. A word people use when they want to put you in a corner and forget about you. I felt my throat burn, but I smiled, because I knew something they didn't. They thought I was just another ambitious woman too soft to fight back. But I had already started 6 years ago, when I first joined Sutton and Bryce Group. I signed up for their employee stock option plan, ESOP. It was a small thing, 0.5% stake, just a bonus they dangled. But I never sold. And over the years, as people quit, got laid off, or moved on, I quietly offered to buy their leftover shares. Sometimes it was through a third-party broker. Sometimes I just made a deal over coffee. Nobody noticed. Nobody cared. Because to them, I was just a name on a quarterly report. But I was watching, tracking, calculating, until I had something more powerful than a job title. I had ownership. 18.4% of voting shares. Enough to shake the very foundation of that boardroom. I walked out of that meeting with my title stripped, but my leverage untouched. I said nothing to my coworkers, nothing to HR. Instead, I stayed late every night, smiling, helping Darren with his emails, acting like nothing had changed. But inside, I was drawing the map. They thought they had won by silencing me. What they didn't know was that my silence was the start of their ending. They thought I forgot, but I remember everything. The day I signed that ESOP agreement, it was raining outside. I was 28, exhausted, and just grateful to be there. Most people tossed the document in a drawer. I read every word. That 0.5% stake, it wasn't just a bonus, it was a door. A quiet door into something bigger. For years, I walked through that door, again and again. I stayed silent. I watched coworkers celebrate titles. While I celebrated timing, anytime someone left, I sent a message. Hey, if you're not holding on to your equity, I'd be happy to help. Most didn't care. Some needed cash. Others didn't believe the company would last. So, I bought their doubt, one share at a time, through coffee shop meetings, through silent transfers in investor portals, through off-the-record handshakes and forgotten spreadsheets. I wasn't chasing prestige. I was building power. I had no office with a view, but I had the cap table memorized. And one day, it tilted in my favor. They were too busy playing politics to notice who really held the vote. By the time I was pushed under Darren, I owned 18.4%, a quiet empire tucked beneath their arrogance. But numbers alone weren't enough. I needed allies. I needed timing. I needed patience. So I stayed. I let Darren sit in my old chair. I let him ask me how to filter Slack channels. I let him talk over me in meetings while misquoting my data. I nodded. I smiled. I took notes. But I was watching everything, and I wasn't the only one. Lisa. The internal auditor, the one they called too intense behind her back, she noticed things too. The founder once humiliated her in front of the full staff town hall, cutting her report short and telling her to smile more. She remembered that. So when I sent her a calendar invite, just coffee, just chatting, she said yes. We sat in a corner cafe, both pretending this wasn't a war strategy. Do you still have access to the board bylaws, I asked. She sipped her coffee, didn't blink. I keep backups, she said. That's when it began. I started gathering proxies. Some were simple. Employees who wanted better health care. Shareholders who hadn't voted in years, happy to let someone else handle it. Every one of them had a story. Every one of them said yes. My pitch was quiet, honest. I want to make this company better. I want to remove the rot. Not everyone said yes, but enough did. When I crossed 51% in proxy voting rights, I didn't scream. I exhaled, once, and then I got to work. The bylaws were clear. A shareholder with majority vote could call a special meeting if supported by at least 2 directors. Lisa signed. The other Raj, our VP of sales, who was always overlooked, always passed over for louder men. When I told him the plan, he didn't hesitate. I've waited 10 years, he said. Let's do it. We set the date. A quiet Friday. End of Q3. Just before quarterly bonuses were to be distributed. They wouldn't see it coming. While Darren paraded in his new role, while Julie crafted another motivational email, while Mark planned a weekend golf trip with the board, I drafted the proposal, effective immediately removal of executive leadership, due to loss of confidence and mismanagement. I added a motion for interim CEO. With my name, I practiced my statement not in the mirror, but in my head, on the subway, in the elevator, brushing my teeth. I didn't want anger in my voice, I wanted stillness. Let them bring the noise. I would bring the vote. On Thursday night, I printed every document twice, filed everything, checked every clause. I slept 4 hours, woke up before sunrise. That morning, I dressed in black, not for mourning, but for clarity. Warriors don't wear white in silence. They wear shadow. 10:00 a.m., the boardroom was packed. Mark looked surprised to see me. Darren gave a little wave. Julie asked, Elena, are you here to take notes? I smiled. Actually, I said, I'd like to present a proposal. Silence. I opened my laptop, turned the screen. Lisa and Raj entered, calm, composed. I read every word of the motion. Julie stood up. This is absurd. You don't have the votes. I slid a document across the table. Signed, sealed, verified, proxies, ownership, directorial support. Mark looked pale, Darren. He finally stopped smiling. The vote was swift, silent, and unanimous. I was named interim CEO effective immediately. Darren didn't say goodbye. Mark grabbed his golf jacket and left. Julie stared at me like she'd seen a ghost. But I wasn't a ghost. I was the consequence. And I had arrived. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just walks into a room, sits down quietly, and rewrites the rules. After the vote, I didn't celebrate. There was no champagne, no applause. Just me, sitting in the CEO chair, in an office I'd only entered once before. It smelled like cedar and old money. I took a deep breath, not out of pride, but to steady myself. Because now everything was mine. And everything could fall apart. The first 48 hours were chaos. Emails flying, whispers in every hallway. Darren was nowhere to be seen. Julie had packed up her office by noon. Mark requested a sabbatical. Coworkers avoided my eyes, unsure what this meant. Was I vengeful? Was I fair? Was I temporary? Was I real? I didn't answer. I just worked, day and night. I met with every department head, listened more than I spoke, took notes by hand. I sent a single email to the entire company. Subject: stability. Body: there will be no layoffs. There will be no chaos. We build from here. It was short, but it traveled. Even Lisa, usually stoic, sent back a one-line reply. You've already done more in 2 days than they did in 2 years. Still, I knew I couldn't rely on sentiment. Revenge feels good for 5 minutes. But after that, you need strategy. So I built a team. Not from the favorites. Not from the loudest. From the overlooked. Samantha, assistant to the CTO who wrote cleaner reports than her boss. Andre from facilities who had ideas for logistics that could save thousands. Mira, the new hire from finance who caught errors on her 3rd day. I brought them into my office, one by one. And I asked the same question, what would you change if you had the power? They thought I was joking. until I handed them influence. Within weeks, the tone of the company shifted. The Slack channels got quieter, but smarter. Meetings got shorter, but sharper. We eliminated nonsense roles, including the made-up title Darren gave himself, Executive Innovation Lead. I replaced it with a real innovation team, cross-functional, diverse, hungry. I wasn't building a throne, I was building a fortress. But word got out. A former board member, one of Julie's old friends, called me. "You're being too aggressive," he said. "You're making people nervous." Good. Let them be nervous. Because I didn't come here to soothe egos. I came to protect the thing we were supposed to be building all along value. Still, not everyone was happy. A few executives tried to undermine me, leaking fake memos to the press, questioning my authority in investor calls. They underestimated one thing. I didn't just have power. I had receipts. Everything, every transfer, every vote, every meeting. I published a transparency report, itemized, time-stamped, backed with legal review. Then I announced an open Q&A session live. No filters. It streamed to the entire company. Thousands watched. And when the questions came, I didn't dodge. I answered them all, even the uncomfortable ones. "Why didn't you warn anyone?" someone asked. I looked straight into the camera. "Because they didn't warn me," I said. Silence. Then a slow wave of comments. She said what needed to be said. Finally, a real leader. That's when the tide turned. Not because I was popular, but because I was transparent. And transparency is magnetic. By the end of Q4, profits were up 17%, turnover dropped, client renewals doubled. But numbers were just surface. The real change was in the eyes of the people walking past my glass office. They didn't look away anymore. They nodded. I nodded back. We didn't need posters on the wall saying empowerment or integrity. We were living it. Still, I knew the quiet wasn't forever. Something was coming. A test. Because in power, the second you get comfortable is the second they start plotting. And they were plotting. They called an emergency board meeting. No subject line, no agenda. Just one line. Attendance required. I smiled when I saw it, because I knew what they were trying to do. They wanted to stop me. After all the changes, the transparency, the power shift, some of the old guard still thought they could take it back. But I had read the bylaws more times than anyone, and I knew exactly what they could and couldn't do. They couldn't fire me without a supermajority, and thanks to my proxies, that majority belonged to me. Still, I went, not because I had to, but because I wanted them to see me. I wore gray that day. Soft, elegant, unshakable. The boardroom was full when I arrived. Some faces tight with nerves, others trying too hard to smile. Julie was there. She had returned as an advisor. Mark had apparently cut his sabbatical short. Darren wasn't there, no surprise. He had started a consulting podcast last I heard. I took my seat, said nothing. The chairman cleared his throat. "Elena, thank you for coming. We've received concerns about leadership direction." I raised an eyebrow. "Whose concerns?" He hesitated. "Some investors, some longtime partners. They feel the company is moving too fast, that it's becoming unpredictable." I let the silence stretch. Then I leaned forward. "And what would you call the past 10 years, when we bled talent, lost deals, promoted mediocrity?" No one answered. I opened my folder. Inside data, charts, retention graphs, profit margins, year-over-year growth. "All in the green," I said. Mark finally spoke. "It's not just about numbers, Elena. It's about trust, culture, stability." Ah, the old buzzwords, used when they wanted things quiet, controlled, convenient. "I'm not here to babysit comfort," I replied. "I'm here to lead." The chairman shifted. "We're proposing an oversight committee," he said, "to advise your actions, approve major decisions." A leash, disguised as structure. I almost laughed. Instead, I stood, walked to the window. Denver stretched out beneath us, the city where I had been underestimated for far too long. Then I turned. "Let me be clear," I said. "This isn't a hostile takeover. This is a correction." I paced slowly, letting each word fall like stone. "You let this company rot from the inside out. You rewarded arrogance. You dismissed brilliance. You silenced women. You gaslighted employees. And you thought the world wouldn't notice. Now they did, and I was the consequence. I'm not asking for permission. I said, I already have the votes. I already have the trust. What I'm offering is a chance to stay part of what comes next." They didn't expect that. A chance. Even mercy is a form of dominance. The room stayed still. Then Raj Loyal, patient Raj, spoke. I second her leadership, he said officially. Lisa nodded. Third. The chairman hesitated. Then finally, reluctantly, he gave in. Motion carried, he muttered. I sat back down, calm. The meeting adjourned, but not before I looked each of them in the eyes. Let them remember what it felt like. To try to cage a storm and watch it stand. When I returned to my office, there were 3 voicemails. One from an investor who once ignored my emails. One from a journalist. And one from my mother. I listened to hers last. She had never understood why I worked so hard. Don't you want a family, she used to ask? Don't you want something soft? But in her message, her voice shook. I heard, she said, they're saying your name on the news. A pause. I'm proud of you, Elena, even if I don't always say it. I sat still for a long time, because sometimes the war outside isn't as loud as the one inside. Later that evening, I walked the office floor. Empty, quiet, mine. I stood in front of the glass wall overlooking the skyline. And I whispered one sentence to no one. They'll never silence me again. Victory didn't come with a standing ovation. There were no balloons, no toasts, no farewell speeches for the ones I replaced. Just silence. And in that silence, I rebuilt everything. I moved into the corner office quietly. No big announcement. No new title plaque. The gold letters on the door still read, CEO. I didn't need to change it, because power doesn't need to shout. It just needs to last. My first month as permanent CEO was spent in shadows, not hiding, but listening. I didn't care about PR. I cared about pulse. What was the heartbeat of the company? Where did it falter? Where did it beat strongest? I held one-on-one meetings with people most leaders ignored. The receptionist who saw everything. The janitor who worked late and heard what others whispered. The interns who had nothing to gain and everything to say. I asked them what would make this place better. And then I actually listened. Some were shocked. Some cried. Some just stared at me like I was a glitch in the system. But piece by piece, the culture began to shift. Not with slogans, not with posters, but with truth. We stopped glamorizing burnout, stopped calling chaos innovation, stopped rewarding noise over value. I rewrote the org chart from the bottom up. Promoted those who built, released those who only performed. We created a fund for continuing education, for mental health, for new parents. Some board members called it excessive. I called it long overdue, and the numbers agreed. By Q2, revenue was up 32%. Turnover was down 48%. Clients stayed longer, referred more. Still, I didn't chase headlines. But they came anyway. The silent CEO who took it all back. She was demoted, now she runs the show. From forgotten to feared, Elena Park's quiet empire. I read them once, then folded the pages away. Because I wasn't doing this for legacy. I was doing it because no one had done it for me. I knew what it felt like to sit in a meeting and be erased. To give everything, and be told you were too much, too intense, too ambitious, too emotional. I kept those moments, I fed on them. And every time I signed a promotion letter for someone who had been ignored, I smiled. Not a grin, just enough. Let them wonder what I was thinking. Let them whisper. Because in the end, the real revenge wasn't the title. It was the transformation. I didn't just survive. I rewrote the rules. One night, I stayed late. The office was empty, lights dimmed, city blinking outside. I walked past every desk, every meeting room, every chair that once overlooked me. And I left a note on my old desk. A sticky note, one sentence. You weren't wrong, you just weren't quiet enough. Then I returned to my office, closed the door, and breathed. This wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about proving myself right. I lit one candle, small, lavender, and sat. Outside, the world kept spinning. But in here, I had built stillness. Not peace, not yet. But presence? I was here. I had earned this. Not through favors, not through noise. Through clarity, through patience, through precision. And in the end, they would forget the emails, the memos, the meetings. But they would never forget this. The woman they tried to silence, who came back with nothing but calm, and took everything, quietly,